For our next project, we'll be exploring the enabling of Google Groups at Case Western Reserve University. Here to provide the update, we have John Lander substituting for project manager Greg Stewart, as well as Ed Rynes to provide some technical subject matter expertise. John and Ed, take it away.
Thank you, Tyler. We're glad to share an update about Google Groups. First off, we wanted to talk a little bit about the background and rationale for starting the project, and Ed will walk us through that.
Okay, we're moving off of SIMPA. SIMPA is just getting really, really old. The hardware is more than 8 years old, and the software is even older than that. We can't really upgrade anything because everything's too interdependent. We can't upgrade the hardware without upgrading the OS. We can't upgrade the OS without upgrading the software. And we can't upgrade the software because it's been so heavily customized to work in our particular environment that it just can't be upgraded. What we need to do, the reason we need to upgrade it is we need a more stable mailing list environment. The existing system is just too fragile. It can't keep up. So we've picked Google Groups as the logical replacement for SIMPA, and that's why we're moving to Google Groups from SIMPA.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Ed. One other thing we wanted to highlight is that this allows us to enable further integration across the Crew Google Apps suite. As we know, over the last several years, we've become adept at using Calendar and Mail and things like Google Docs, and adding the Google Groups feature really allows us to continue that. Next, we want to talk about some of the milestones of the project. One of the large milestones that we've been working on really over the last several months is to create a tool that will allow us to migrate the list from SIMPA to Google Groups. We're confident that this tool will allow us to migrate a significant percentage of those lists, and there will be some, obviously, where it can, and we'll clearly document those and communicate that to the campus. And we've also been spending some time talking about supporting communications and training materials to make that tool and the migration process as easy as it can, because we do know that there's a learning curve to using Google Groups, just like any new system. And also we want to make sure we provide some ample time and documentation and clearly communicate to the campus this process and make sure folks have the time they need. And I think we also wanted to highlight what we wanted to do for some lists that won't be able to be migrated by the tool. So I'll pass to Ed.
Yeah, there's some features in Google Groups or in SIMPA that are not available in Google Groups. So we will be developing some tools that will enable Google Groups to handle some of those more advanced features, such as populating a list based on a database or an LDAP group and creating groups with large numbers of external users. Google makes that difficult, so we'll come up with some ways around that. And then we will be eventually decommissioning the SIMPA server, but don't worry, we're going to wait until we have completely gotten everybody moved over, including the people who have these special cases. So there's no immediate plan to decommission the SIMPA server, but it will be coming down the road.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you, Ed. We also wanted to highlight some of the project status. We've been testing the migration tool, internally within the division, as well as with some distributed technology folks throughout the campus to gain a better understanding of how it works and to make sure that the settings are migrating properly from any SIMPA list to the newly created Google group. And we're really trying to do our best to make sure that we've tested all those scenarios so that when it is in use by the campus, that it's ready and it's working. We're also reviewing all of our communications training materials and our launch plan to make sure that these are easy to understand and easily accessible for folks throughout the campus, for students, faculty, and staff. And then we're getting ready and preparing for Go Live. We're hoping within the next several weeks or so that there'll be broader communication to the campus, letting them know that it's ready and that folks can start migrating their lists. And we'll be here to provide whatever support we can, whether it's through things like training materials or table tents, or if folks want to call the service desk, and we'll be glad to help however we can. If we take back and just look at the overall timeline, this phase kind of makes sense to group into two separate phases. The first, which we've been talking about, is to develop and deploy this migration tool. Once again, as we said, we're confident that it will be able to migrate a significant percentage, 95% of the lists from SIMPA over to Google Groups. And then the second, as Ed talked about, and we'll highlight a little more, is to customize Google Groups.
Yes, as we finish off phase one and are ready to deploy, we will begin phase two, which will focus on those special, unique cases in Google Groups that don't quite work the way SIMPA worked. That phase has not yet started, so it's going to be a while before those features come out. So if you have a list that makes use of database-backed lists or LDAP-backed lists or other lists that don't fall under the standard SIMPA tool list, it'll be a little while before we have something available for you, but we should be able to migrate at least 95% of the lists over with a very simple tool that's going to be released shortly.
Thank you, Ed. Just to highlight, we'll be very clearly communicating with the campus as we move out throughout this project, and be able, probably in upcoming projects live sessions, sharing some additional updates about the project. And finally, when we're all ready, we'll close out the project. Those were all the items we had for today, so we'll be glad to take any questions from the audience. Tyler?
All right, John and Ed, thank you very much for that update. So we have one question from the audience, and it is, how do we know if we have a mailing list that we must migrate?
Well, if the mailing list exists on SIMPA, it will need to be migrated. You log into lists.case.edu, and there's a button there that says show my lists, and it will list all of the lists that you own that will need to be migrated.
And we'll also make sure that that answer is clearly documented in any FAQs or project documentation, so people who may be curious if they have lists or not are able to find out if they do. Thank you, Tyler.
Yeah, thanks, John and Ed. And then just to clarify, it's moderators and list owners that can migrate a list, correct?
That's correct.
Great.